She was the virgin wife he humiliated before everyone. He was the proud sheikh who swore he would never love her. But when pain turned into strength and contempt slowly transformed into desire, the impossible began to take shape. Comment where you're watching from, leave a like, and subscribe, because this story will burn like the desert sun until the very last second. The sound of engines thundered across the desert of Darren like a distant storm. Yasmin Al-Karam froze mid-motion, her fingers still tangled in her long, dark hair. Her heart skipped violently in her chest as she rushed toward the window of her bedroom. From there, she saw the long line of black cars crossing the iron gates of the palace, raising clouds of sand behind them. He had returned. Hassan al-Rashid was back, after 5 long years in London. Yasmin inhaled deeply, forcing her hands to stop trembling. She turned toward the mirror and studied her reflection one last time. At 22, she was no longer the awkward girl Hassan had left behind. Time had reshaped her gently. Her dark eyes held a quiet intensity now, her features softened yet stronger, more confident. The navy blue dress hugged her body perfectly, highlighting curves life itself had sculpted. Today, my life truly begins, she whispered to herself. Since childhood, Yasmin had known this day would come. The promise between the Al-Karim and Al-Rashid families was ancient, unquestioned, sacred. For years, she had nurtured romantic dreams about the moment Hassan would return for her. She imagined him smiling, lifting her into his arms, whispering tender words meant only for her. She imagined leaving together for London, where he had built a powerful career as the future leader of a vast oil empire. She imagined everything wrong. When Hassan stepped out of the main car, Yasmin felt the air leave her lungs. He was taller, broader, more commanding than she remembered. His dark suit contrasted sharply with his sun-bronzed skin, but it was his eyes, those green eyes she had once loved from afar, now cold, distant, almost unreadable, that made her shiver. Hassan did not smile. He barely looked at her. In the grand hall, the family gathered to welcome the returning sheikh. Yasmin's father, Abdullah Al-Karim, embraced Hassan with tears in his eyes. Her mother, Layla, kissed both his cheeks, holding his face as if he were her own son. "My dear Hassan," Layla said warmly, "you've grown so much, such a strong man." Hassan smiled politely, but his gaze remained detached. Then finally he turned toward Yasmin. What she saw there made her blood run cold. Surprise, shock, and then irritation, barely concealed. "Yasmin," he said with a formal nod that cut her deeper than any insult. "You've changed." She tried to smile, her voice trembling. "Hassan, we need to talk." "I need to speak with your father," he interrupted calmly, already turning away. "Abdullah, I require a private conversation." Silence sliced through the room. Yasmin remained standing in the center of the hall as Hassan and her father walked away. Tears burned her eyes as the women of the family gathered around her, murmuring comfort she could barely hear. All she could think about was the coldness in his gaze. Inside the meeting room, Abdullah poured tea and sat across from Hassan. Minutes passed in heavy silence before Hassan finally spoke. "I can't do this," he said, staring into the cup in his hands. "I can't marry her." Abdullah exhaled slowly. "My son, you always knew this day would come. The promise between our families is sacred." "I was a child when that promise was made," Hassan replied sharply. "My life is in London now. I have responsibilities, commitments." "And what kind of life is that?" Abdullah asked firmly. "I've heard rumors, Hassan. Women, parties. Is that what you call a life?" Hassan clenched his fists. In London, he had lived freely. Power, pleasure, excess. A freedom that had quietly enslaved his pride. The last thing he wanted was to be tied down by traditions he considered outdated. Outside the door, Yasmin leaned against the cold corridor wall. She heard everything. "I can't marry her." The words echoed like a sentence of condemnation. She pressed a hand to her chest as her heart shattered into pieces. 22 years of dreams collapsed in seconds. "Yasmin is no longer a child," Abdullah insisted. "She is intelligent, graceful, worthy of you. She waited for you." Hassan closed his eyes. He had noticed. For one brief moment in the hall, He had forgotten how to breathe. The thin, shy girl of his memory had become a breathtaking woman. That only made everything worse. "I won't," he repeated, standing abruptly. "I won't ruin her life by forcing a marriage I don't want." Abdullah rose as well, his voice turning hard. "And you think rejecting her now won't ruin her? After all these years? What future will she have? What man will want a woman rejected by her promised husband?" The words struck Hassan like arrows. "You are the sheikh now," Abdullah continued. "Your father named you his heir. You have obligations to your people, your traditions. You cannot discard everything because London felt easier." In the corridor, Yasmin's legs trembled. She understood then. He didn't want her. She was a burden, a duty. Tears streamed silently down her face. Hassan remained quiet for a long time. Refusing her would bring shame to both families. He was trapped by honor, by duty, by a promise made before he understood its weight. "Very well," he finally said, his voice cold as desert wind. "The wedding will happen. But don't expect happiness. And don't expect me to pretend." Yasmin stepped away from the door before they emerged. She returned to the hall, standing exactly where he had left her. When Hassan came back, she held her head high, her posture dignified despite the tears in her eyes. "The wedding will proceed," Hassan announced to the family. "In 1 week." Hope flickered briefly in Yasmin's chest, until he leaned close and whispered words she would never forget. "Do not deceive yourself, Yasmin. You will be my wife on paper, never my woman." In that instant, she understood. Her marriage was a prison. When the music began, Yasmin descended the marble steps at her father's side. Each step brought her closer to Hassan, closer to her golden prison. A collective sigh of admiration spread through the hall as she appeared. The dress embraced her natural beauty with elegance, the jewels framing her face and making her eyes shine like distant stars. She was breathtaking. Hassan looked up as she approached. For a brief second, their eyes met. Yasmin saw something flicker across his face, surprise again, and perhaps, for the first time, something dangerously close to admiration. But it lasted only a heartbeat. The cold mask returned and Hassan looked away. When Abdullah placed Yasmin's hand into Hassan's, she felt the chill of his skin. His grip was firm but distant, careful to touch only what tradition required. No warmth, no tenderness, as if he were holding the hand of a stranger. The imam began the ceremony. Words about sacred union filled the air, about eternal commitment, mutual respect, and love blessed by Allah. To Yasmin, each sentence sounded like cruel irony. When it was time for the vows, Hassan spoke in a mechanical voice, devoid of emotion. "I accept Yasmin Al-Karim as my wife before Allah and our traditions." It sounded less like a promise and more like a contract. When it was her turn, Yasmin gathered every fragment of courage she had left. She poured sincerity into her words, hoping, foolishly, that he might feel something, even for a second. "I accept Hassan al-Rashid as my husband before Allah," she said softly. "I promise loyalty and devotion." Hassan did not react. When the imam declared them bound in matrimony, applause erupted. Traditional music echoed through the hall. Rose petals rained over them. They were officially married. Hassan did not kiss her. As petals fell around her, Yasmin felt invisible. The applause celebrated a lie, not her. She forced a smile for the crowd, but all she could see were his cold eyes, as if none of it meant anything to him. Throughout the celebration, Hassan kept his distance. He greeted guests, posed for photographs, played the role of the satisfied sheikh flawlessly. But he barely spoke to his wife unless absolutely necessary. Yasmin stood beside him like an ornament. She smiled when expected. She waved when expected. Inside, she shattered piece by piece. When the last song ended and the final guests departed, silence fell over the palace like a heavy veil. Hassan turned and walked toward the sheikh's private quarters. Yasmin followed, uncertain. No one had told her where she was supposed to sleep now that she was married. "Hassan," she called when he stopped before the door. He turned and, for the first time that day, looked directly at her. Yes? Where should I? She hesitated. Your belongings have been moved to the room beside mine, he said coldly. You will have your own quarters, your own entrance. You won't need to disturb me. The words felt like a slap. Hassan, we're married now, she said quietly. Couldn't we at least try? Try what? He interrupted, irritation flashing in his green eyes. Yasmin, I was clear last week. You are my wife only on paper. This marriage exists to satisfy tradition and preserve honor. He stepped closer. She could smell his cologne, feel the strength radiating from him. Her heart betrayed her, racing for a moment. Then his voice cut through her like knives. You will never be my woman. We will never share a bed. There will be no intimacy, no love. We are strangers who share a surname, nothing more. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of him, not when he already had the power to destroy her with words. I understand, she said, her voice trembling but dignified. And I hope you understand that I have self-respect, Hassan. I will never beg for your attention or affection. He blinked, surprised by her firmness. You've made it clear I am merely a duty. Yasmin continued, lifting her chin. Very well. But I will never lower myself asking for something you refuse to give. For a moment, Hassan seemed unsettled, as if he hadn't expected that response. Yasmin turned and walked toward her new quarters. At the door, she paused and looked back. Good night, husband. May Allah help us endure the prison we've chosen. The door closed behind her, leaving him alone in the corridor. For the first time since returning to Darren, Hassan felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Sharp, almost painful. He refused to name it. The first days of marriage were a brutal lesson in loneliness. Yasmin woke alone every morning in her lavish room. Silk fabrics, carved furniture, marble floors, a golden bathtub overlooking the gardens, a luxurious cage. Each day she dressed carefully, elegant gowns, long hair brushed until it shone like silk, soft makeup, not to impress Hassan, but because she refused to surrender to sadness. If he wants a wife only in appearance, she whispered to the mirror, then he will have the most dignified one possible. Hassan established a routine that excluded her entirely. He breakfasted alone before she woke, spent the day ruling the principality, dined late, often outside the palace. When they crossed paths, he treated her like air. Yasmin learned to exist like a shadow in her own home. In the early weeks, she tried to break the ice. She appeared in the library when she knew he'd be there, suggested dinner together, asked about his work. He answered in monosyllables, or not at all. Yet Yasmin noticed something he believed he hid well. He watched her, in the garden as she watered the flowers, in the hall as she read on the terrace, at sunset, when she admired the sky. Hassan studied her like a puzzle he couldn't solve. The shy, awkward girl of his memory had become a woman of magnetic presence. Yasmin walked with her head held high, spoke gently but firmly, smiled sincerely at the staff. Her dignity irritated him. He wanted her to beg, to cry, to plead for affection. Instead, she treated him with polite courtesy. Good morning, Hassan. Excuse me. Have a good day. Never, my love. Never, dear. Never anything intimate. It was as if she had accepted his terms completely, and that bothered him more than he cared to admit. One morning, Hassan came down earlier than usual and found Yasmin having breakfast alone on the terrace. She wore a light blue dress that made her eyes glow, her hair loose in the morning breeze. He stopped, watching her. She didn't look sad. She read peacefully, sipping coffee, occasionally smiling at the page. How could someone be at peace in a loveless marriage? Good morning, she said when she noticed him, not lifting her eyes from the book. He hesitated, considered sitting with her, asking about the book, being normal. Instead, he took a cup of coffee and walked away, but he looked back once. Yasmin continued reading, seemingly unaffected by his rejection, and it irritated him deeply. That night, Hassan locked himself in his office, but found his gaze drifting to the garden below. Yasmin walked slowly among the rose bushes, her white dress glowing in the moonlight. She sat by the fountain, closed her eyes, and breathed deeply. There was something hypnotic about her serenity. "Why doesn't she break?" he muttered. Any other woman would have cried, demanded answers, threatened to leave. Yasmin did none of that. She simply existed, with a grace that made him feel smaller than he liked. The next morning, Hassan decided to test the limits of that serenity. During breakfast, one they rarely shared, he sat at her table. She greeted him politely and continued eating. You should be more unhappy." Hassan's voice cut through the quiet breakfast without warning. Yasmin slowly lifted her eyes from her plate. "I'm sorry?" "You're married to a man who made it very clear he doesn't want you," he continued coolly. "Most women would be crying, causing scenes, demanding change." Yasmin placed her fork down carefully, her movements controlled. She looked straight into his eyes. "And what would you gain from that, Hassan?" she asked calmly. "Would you feel powerful watching my tears? Would it make you feel desired if I begged?" Hassan stiffened, clearly unsettled by her bluntness. "I won't give you that pleasure," Yasmin went on, her voice steady but firm. "You made it clear this marriage is an obligation. Very well, I accept that. But don't expect me to humiliate myself crying for something you have no intention of giving." Hassan opened his mouth to reply, but Yasmin stood up. "Excuse me, I have commitments today." She walked away, leaving him alone with an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. For the first time since returning to Darren, Hassan wondered if he had completely underestimated the woman he married. That night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling of his room. On the other side of the wall, Yasmin slept alone, physically close, yet utterly unreachable. And for the first time, Hassan questioned who was truly imprisoned inside that invisible cage. 3 weeks after the wedding, their first official event as a couple arrived. A formal reception for foreign ambassadors and international businessmen visiting Darren. As a married sheikh, Hassan could not attend alone. "You will need to be present," he told Yasmin that morning, his tone cold and professional. "Wear something appropriate." She nodded. "Of course." That afternoon, Yasmin chose a long emerald green silk dress. The color deepened her dark eyes and contrasted beautifully with her golden skin. The neckline was modest, but the cut embraced her curves with effortless elegance. When she descended the palace stairs, Hassan was waiting in the entrance hall. He stopped breathing for a second. Yasmin was stunning. The fabric flowed around her like water. Her hair was styled in a low bun, exposing her neck. She wore only a simple pearl necklace and small earrings. Pure elegance. Hassan quickly looked away. "Let's go, we're late." During the drive to the hotel, silence filled the back seat. Yasmin gazed out the window. Hassan pretended to read documents, though his eyes kept drifting back to her. When they entered the reception hall, heads turned immediately. Murmurs of admiration rippled through the room. Yasmin walked beside Hassan with perfect posture, a polite smile on her lips. "Sheikh Hassan," the French ambassador greeted warmly. "What a pleasure, and this must be your wife." "This is Yasmin al-Rashid," Hassan said formally. The ambassador kissed her hand. "Charming. You're even more beautiful than the photograph suggested." "Thank you," Yasmin replied graciously. Throughout the night it was the same. Guests approached to meet the new sheikha. Compliments flowed freely. Her beauty, her elegance, her intelligence. Yasmin spoke fluent English and French. She discussed politics and economics with ease, each response earning respectful attention. Hassan watched with growing irritation. He should have felt proud. Yasmin was exactly the kind of wife a sheikh needed, refined, intelligent, captivating. Yet every compliment directed at her unsettled him. The turning point came when Sir Richard Blackwood, a British businessman in his 50s, approached with champagne in hand. "Sheikh Hassan," Blackwood said confidently, "you are a fortunate man. Your wife is one of the most beautiful women I've ever met." Hassan forced a smile. "Thank you. And intelligent as well," Blackwood continued, turning to Yasmin. "Our conversation about international markets was fascinating." "You're very kind, Sir Richard," Yasmin replied politely. "You know," he added, stepping a bit closer, "if you ever tire of desert life, London always has room for a woman like you." The comment was delivered lightly, but the intention was unmistakable. Hassan felt his blood boil. His fists clenched, a vein pulsing at his temple. "Excuse me," he said in a dangerously low voice. Blackwood laughed. "Relax, Hassan. Just a compliment." "Men like us," Blackwood added smugly, "know how to recognize quality." "Men like us?" Hassan repeated, stepping forward. Yasmin sensed the tension and placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Hassan," but it was too late. "Sir Richard," Hassan said icily, "I suggest you keep your admiration to yourself. My wife is not interested in your offers." Silence spread around them. Blackwood raised his hands, still smiling nervously. No offense intended, simply appreciating good taste. "Your appreciation is unwelcome," Hassan replied coldly. Yasmin felt embarrassment rise in her chest. "Perhaps we should—" "I believe our business can be discussed with other partners." Hassan cut in sharply. The veiled threat was clear. Blackwood's smile vanished. "Of course, Sheikh. Excuse me." He retreated quickly. Hassan grabbed Yasmin's arm, harder than necessary. "We're leaving." The ride back was suffocatingly silent. Yasmin could feel Hassan's anger radiating from him. The moment they entered the palace, he exploded. "What was that?" he demanded. "What are you talking about?" Yasmin asked, genuinely confused. "That performance," he snapped. "Flirting with every man in that room. Letting that fool practically make proposals to you right in front of me." Yasmin stared at him in disbelief. "Flirting? Hassan, I was being polite. I was doing my duty as your wife." "Your duty doesn't include seducing half the hall," he accused. "Seducing?" Anger surged through her. "I answered questions. I smiled when expected. What exactly should I have done? Stayed silent like a doll?" "You loved the attention," Hassan continued, ignoring her. "You loved being admired." "Stop!" Yasmin shouted. He froze. "Stop now," she said, stepping closer, eyes blazing. "You want the truth?" "Yes, I enjoyed speaking with intelligent people. Yes, I enjoyed being treated like a human being worthy of respect. Because for weeks I've lived in this house like a ghost, ignored by my own husband." Hassan opened his mouth, but she wasn't finished. "But seducing? Flirting?" She laughed bitterly. "I asked for nothing except respect. And if that bothers you, then I am not the problem." "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice lacked force. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," Yasmin replied. "You weren't jealous of them looking at me. You were angry because your property was being admired." The word struck him like a blow. "You are not my property," he said defensively. "Then why?" She pressed, stepping closer. "Why the anger? Why do you care what other men think of me if I mean nothing to you but a duty?" Hassan had no answer. For the first time since their marriage, Yasmin had cornered him with his own logic. He began, but couldn't finish. She studied him, then spoke softly but firmly. "You can't have me, but you can't let me go. You despise me, yet you're enraged when others value me. You want my submission, but you're threatened by my strength." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Maybe the problem isn't me seeking attention. Maybe it's you not knowing what you truly want." Yasmin turned and walked upstairs, leaving him alone in the hall. Hassan remained there for a long time, heart pounding. For the first time since returning to Dharan, Hassan al-Rashid was left completely speechless by his wife, and realized something inside him had shifted. He didn't know whether that frightened him or intrigued him more. 3 days after the reception, Hassan announced they would visit a charitable institution in Dharan, part of their obligations as a royal couple. It was expected that they would appear together at social events and publicly support the causes of the principality. "That is expected of us," Hassan said coldly during breakfast, without looking at Yasmin. "The car leaves in 1 hour." Yasmin nodded in silence. Since the argument at the palace, they had barely exchanged more than the strictly necessary words. Yet something had shifted between them. An invisible tension now filled the air. It was different from before, heavier, sharper, as if Yasmin's words had cracked something Hassan had kept tightly sealed for years. The institution was located on the outskirts of the city, an orphanage that sheltered children from families destroyed by regional conflicts. Hassan and Yasmin were welcomed by the director, a kind woman in her early 60s. She bowed respectfully. "Your Highness, Sheikh Hassan, and Sheikha Yasmin, it is an honor to receive you," she said warmly. "The children are very excited to meet you." During the visit, Yasmin seemed to transform. Hassan watched her closely as she interacted with the children with a natural ease that genuinely surprised him. She knelt to their height, listened attentively to their stories, and smiled in a way that illuminated her entire face, a smile he realized he had not seen since their wedding. A small girl, no more than 5 years old, approached Yasmin timidly. "Are you really a princess?" the child asked, her eyes wide with wonder. Yasmin laughed softly, a melodic sound Hassan hadn't heard in a long time. "I'm just a woman, like any other," Yasmin replied gently, adjusting the little girl's dress. "But I can be your friend." The child smiled brightly and wrapped her arms around Yasmin's legs. Hassan felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest, sharp, unsettling, and entirely unwelcome. After the official visit, the director invited them to see the garden behind the building, where the children cultivated vegetables and flowers. "May I see it?" Yasmin asked, genuinely interested. The garden was simple, but well cared for. Neat beds of vegetables lined the paths, punctuated by colorful flowers. Yasmin walked slowly between them, admiring the children's work. That was when it happened. A loose stone on the gravel path, the high heels she was wearing. One misstep. Yasmin stumbled and fell, twisting her right ankle sharply. Her cry of pain made Hassan rush toward her without thinking. "Yasmin!" He dropped to his knees beside her, forgetting entirely the cold distance he had been maintaining. "Are you hurt?" She tried to stand, but her ankle gave out beneath her. She swayed, and Hassan caught her by the waist, steadying her before she could fall again. "My ankle," she whispered, her face contorted in pain. Without hesitation, Hassan scooped her into his arms. Yasmin instinctively wrapped her arms around his neck, surprised by the sudden closeness. "We need to take her to a doctor," Hassan said firmly to the director, who had rushed over, alarmed. "There's a medical office upstairs," the woman replied. "Dr. Ahmad attends here twice a week. He's here today." Hassan carried Yasmin up the stairs. She was light in his arms, but he could feel the tension in her body from the pain. Her soft perfume surrounded him, and against his will, he noticed how perfectly she fit against his chest. The doctor examined her ankle and concluded it was not broken, only sprained. "She needs rest, ice, and to avoid putting weight on it for a few days," Dr. Ahmad explained. "She'll be fine." During the drive back to the palace, Yasmin remained quiet, clearly uncomfortable. Hassan watched her from the corner of his eye, noticing how she tried to hide the pain. When they arrived, he carried her again, this time to her bedroom. "Thank you," Yasmin said softly when he placed her gently on the bed. "You can leave now. I'll ask one of the maids to bring ice," she added. "No," Hassan replied, his voice unexpectedly firm. "The doctor said you need to elevate your foot and apply ice immediately." She looked at him in surprise. It was the first time he had shown genuine concern. Hassan returned moments later with a tray, ice wrapped in a towel, painkillers, and a cup of tea. "Take off your shoe," he said, placing the tray beside the bed. "Hassan, that's not necessary." "Take off the shoe." There was something in his tone that made her obey. He knelt beside the bed and carefully unfastened the heel, removing it slowly. Yasmin held her breath when his fingers brushed her skin. Her ankle was swollen, already bruising. "That must hurt," Hassan murmured, examining it carefully. His hands were large and warm against her skin. Yasmin felt a shiver that had nothing to do with pain. "It's not that bad," she lied. Hassan looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "You don't need to pretend with me, Yasmin." His voice was different, softer, almost tender. He placed the ice compress on her ankle with surprising gentleness, then lifted her leg and slid a pillow beneath it. "Better?" he asked, his hands still holding her foot. Yasmin found herself unable to speak. His closeness made her heart race. Hassan should have stepped away. He should have left the room and returned to his familiar coldness. Instead, he stayed there, kneeling beside her, his hand still touching her leg. "Why did you do this?" Yasmin asked softly. "You carried me. You're taking care of me." He remained silent for a long moment. "You are my wife," he finally said, but even to him, the words sounded hollow. "Only on paper," Yasmin replied quietly, echoing his own words. Hassan leaned closer, his hand sliding slowly up her leg until they stopped at her knee. "Yasmin," he murmured. And there was something dangerous in his voice. She could feel the heat radiating from him, his masculine scent making her dizzy, the intensity of his green eyes studying her as if seeing her for the first time. "Hassan," she whispered back, unsure whether it was a warning or an invitation. He leaned closer still. Yasmin could feel his breath on her face. Their gazes locked, and the world around them seemed to disappear. Hassan lifted one hand and gently touched her face. Yasmin closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, a soft sigh escaping her lips. "You are beautiful," he murmured, his voice rough. "So beautiful. Sometimes it hurts to look at you." Her eyes opened, shimmering with unshed tears. Hassan leaned in, his lips just centimeters from hers. Yasmin could feel the heat, the promise of a kiss she had dreamed of since childhood. He cupped her face with both hands, his fingers threading into her hair. She gripped his wrist, feeling his racing heartbeat beneath her fingers. Their noses brushed lightly. His warm breath mingled with hers, creating an intimacy that hovered on the edge of a kiss. His lips brushed hers, barely there. Not quite a kiss. The faint contact made Yasmin gasp, as if she had already been claimed. "Yasmin," he whispered against her lips, his voice vibrating against her skin. The entire world narrowed to the space between them, a breath, a decision, a fragile line between restraint and surrender. Suddenly, Hassan pulled back as if burned. "I'm sorry," he said abruptly, standing up. I shouldn't have." The moment shattered like glass. Yasmin felt her heart break for the second time since their marriage. "Rest," Hassan said, already walking toward the door, his voice returning to its usual coldness, though she could hear the effort behind it. "I'll have a maid check on you." "Hassan, wait!" But he was already gone, closing the door behind him with more force than necessary. Yasmin remained alone, her heart still racing. She lifted her fingers to her lips, lips that had not been kissed, feeling the ache of what almost was. For the first time, she had seen a crack in Hassan's armor, desire in his eyes, tenderness in his hands, and then he had fled. Outside, Hassan leaned against the wall, his breathing uneven, his hands trembling slightly. For a moment he had forgotten everything, his pride, his anger, his determination to keep his distance. He had seen only Yasmin, and he had almost surrendered. Almost. But Hassan al-Rashid was not ready to admit that Yasmin had already fractured his defenses. In the 3 days following the almost kiss, Hassan disappeared completely. Yasmin did not see him at breakfast. She did not find him in the library. She did not hear his footsteps in the corridors. It was as if he had evaporated from the palace, but she knew he was still there. She saw the lights on in his office late into the night. She heard the muffled sound of phone calls through the thick walls. Hassan was hiding from her, and that made her furious. On the morning of the 4th day, Yasmin decided she had had enough. Her ankle was almost healed, but her patience was completely gone. She pushed open the door of Hassan's office without knocking. "Come in," his voice said coldly from inside. Hassan al-Rashid was seated behind his massive mahogany desk, surrounded by documents, contracts, and reports. He didn't even lift his eyes when she entered. "We need to talk," Yasmin said, closing the door behind her. "I'm busy," Hassan replied without looking up. "If this is about the weekly schedule, speak to my assistant." "It's not about the schedule." Hassan sighed, clearly irritated, and finally raised his gaze. "What do you want?" The chill in his voice hit her like a slap. It was as if the last few days had never existed, as if that moment of tenderness, that almost kiss, had been nothing more than her imagination. "I want to understand what happened," Yasmin said, stepping closer. "Why did you run away?" "I didn't run away from anything," Hassan replied, returning his attention to the papers. "I simply went back to important matters." "Important matters," Yasmin repeated bitterly. "Is that what you call what happened between us?" Hassan dropped his pen harder than necessary onto the desk. "Nothing happened between us, Yasmin. Nothing that mattered." The words cut like knives. Still, Yasmin refused to retreat. "Then why did your hands shake?" she asked quietly. "Why did your voice change when you said I was beautiful?" Hassan stood abruptly, his fists pressing into the desk. "You're imagining things." "Am I?" Yasmin stepped closer until she stood directly across from him. "Am I imagining the way you touched me? The way you looked at me? Am I imagining that you almost kissed me?" "Enough, Yasmin." "Enough?" she challenged. "Enough!" Hassan shouted, rounding the desk until he stood just inches from her. They were so close she could feel his breath, uneven and fast. She saw the conflict burning behind his green eyes. "Why does this scare you so much?" she asked, her voice low but intense. "Why does the idea of feeling something for me terrify you?" Hassan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You really believe I feel something for you?" The question hit her like a punch to the stomach, but she stayed standing. "You are a burden," he said coldly, "an obligation I was forced to accept." The word echoed in the room. Burden. Something inside Yasmin snapped, not in pain, but in pure, burning anger. "A burden?" she repeated, her voice dangerously calm. "Yes," Hassan said, almost relieved to say it aloud. "A weight imposed on me against my will." "Against your will?" Yasmin stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "Do you think I don't know who you are?" She raised a hand, stopping him before he could interrupt. "You will listen to me now." For the first time since they had met, Hassan fell silent. "You are Hassan al-Rashid," she continued, "the Sheikh of Dharan, heir to one of the largest oil empires in the world. You have enough power to move mountains, to change laws, to bend reality itself." He opened his mouth to argue, but she wasn't finished. "If you truly did not want this marriage, if I were truly nothing but an unwanted burden, you would have stopped it." Her words landed like precise shots. "You could have paid my father, created a scandal, claimed incompatibility. You could have done anything." Hassan went pale. "But you didn't," she said relentlessly. "Do you know why?" She stepped even closer until she could see his pupils dilated. "Because you wanted to marry me. Because some part of you, no matter how small, desired it." "That's absurd," Hassan muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then answer me," Yasmin said softly. "Why didn't you fight it?" Silence. Why did a man with so much power simply accept a marriage he claims he never wanted? More silence. "Why did you bring me to London instead of leaving me here, far from your perfect life?" Hassan tried to step back, but she followed. "And why?" She finished, her voice like thunder. "Did you almost kiss me?" Hassan had no answer. For the first time in his life, he had no prepared excuse, no logical defense. Yasmin studied him for a long moment. "You know what your problem is, Hassan," she said calmly. "You thought I would be like all the other women in your life, submissive, desperate for your approval, willing to accept scraps of affection." He watched her, fascinated despite himself. "You wanted me to beg, to cry, to humiliate myself so you could feel powerful." Every word was true, and they both knew it. "But I didn't," she continued. "I stood up. I kept my dignity. I treated you with respect even when you didn't deserve it." Hassan swallowed hard. "And that confused you," she said, "because for the first time, you met a woman who doesn't need you, a woman who can live perfectly well without your approval or your love." She stepped back, creating distance. "That terrifies you, Hassan. Because if you ever want me for real, you'll have to step down from your pedestal. You'll have to admit you're not as cold and controlled as you pretend to be." He stood frozen. "So instead," she concluded, "you call me a burden, rather than admit I'm the one woman who managed to crack the armor around your heart." The silence that followed was deafening. Hassan stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. She was not the shy girl he remembered. She was not the submissive wife he expected. She was a force of nature. "Yasmin," he began. But she was already walking toward the door. "When you decide to stop lying to yourself," she said without turning around, "you know where to find me." The door closed softly behind her. Hassan remained alone in the office, his heart pounding like a war drum. He realized his wife had just dismantled every defense he had built over the past 10 years. For the first time in his adult life, Hassan al-Rashid felt completely exposed. After the confrontation, Yasmin did not wait for apologies, explanations, or change. Instead, she built a life of her own inside that empty marriage. The next morning, she called the director of the orphanage they had visited. "I'd like to help," Yasmin said, "not just with donations, but with real work." "It would be an honor, Sheikha Yasmin," the woman replied, emotional. "Please," Yasmin said gently, "just call me Yasmin." She began visiting the orphanage 3 times a week, helping with homework, organizing activities, listening to stories with endless patience. Soon she found other places that needed help: a home for abandoned elderly, a rehabilitation center for abused women, a school in an impoverished district. Yasmin threw herself into volunteer work like someone diving into deep water. Hassan learned about her activities through security reports. The Sheikha visited Al-Noor orphanage for 4 hours. One report read. Later she went to the elderly home of the forgotten. In the afternoon she visited the Al-Sara community school. At first, Hassan thought it was a phase, a way to provoke him. But the weeks passed, and she didn't stop. The newspapers began calling her the People's Sheikha, the princess who embraced the forgotten. Photos showed Yasmin laughing with orphaned children, holding the hands of lonely elders, comforting wounded women. She smiled in every image, a genuine smile he rarely saw at home. One day, Hassan decided to see it for himself. He drove to Al-Noor orphanage without warning, parked across the street, and watched through the darkened windows of his car. Yasmin was in the courtyard, surrounded by more than 20 children. She wore a simple floral dress, flat shoes, her hair tied in a practical ponytail. She told a story, changing her voice for each character. The children laughed, captivated. A little girl sat on her lap, playing with a strand of her hair. Hassan watched for nearly an hour, and for the first time, he wondered not when Yasmin had changed, but how he had ever failed to see her at all. He watched the way she comforted a shy little boy who stayed hidden in the corner, how she divided her attention equally among all of them. There was something in the way Yasmin moved among the children, natural, instinctive, maternal, loving, as if she had been born for that role. Hassan felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest, something he preferred not to name. When Yasmin finally prepared to leave, the children gathered around her, clinging to her dress, asking her to stay longer. "I'll come back tomorrow," she promised, kissing each small forehead one by one. "Be good for Aunt Mariam." Hassan saw the sad little eyes watching her go, saw them waving until Yasmin's car disappeared around the corner. Only then did he notice that others had been watching as well. Parents picking up children from the school across the street, shopkeepers from nearby stores, strangers standing quietly, all looking at Yasmin with something Hassan recognized instantly: respect, admiration, genuine affection. Yasmin had won the heart of the people of Dharan, without speeches, without announcements, without carefully crafted campaigns, simply by being herself. Hassan returned home with that strange, unsettling feeling still lodged in his chest. During dinner, he watched Yasmin eat in silence. She looked tired, but there was a peace on her face he hadn't seen in weeks. "How was your day?" he asked suddenly, surprising both of them. Yasmin looked up, clearly caught off guard by the question. "It was good," she replied cautiously. "And yours?" "Fine," Hassan said, hesitating. I heard you've been doing volunteer work. So you heard, Yasmin replied, arching an eyebrow. Or did you have me followed? To his credit, Hassan at least looked uncomfortable. My responsibility is to ensure your safety. I understand, Yasmin said, returning to her meal. Yes, I'm doing volunteer work. I hope that's not a problem. And why would it be a problem? She asked, lifting her eyes to meet his. Because everything I do seems to bother you somehow. Hassan had no answer. In the weeks that followed, he found himself watching Yasmin more often, not openly, but through stolen glances during meals. Through security reports he read with growing attention. Through newspaper photos he studied longer than he should have. Yasmin noticed. One morning, as she drank her coffee on the terrace, she spoke without lifting her eyes from the newspaper. Do you want to ask me something about my work? Hassan nearly dropped his cup. What are you talking about? You've been watching me, Yasmin said, finally looking at him. For weeks, whenever you think I'm not noticing. His face warmed. I haven't. Hassan, she interrupted softly. We're adults. If you're curious about what I do, you can simply ask. For a moment, Hassan considered lying, denying it, retreating behind his familiar mask of indifference. Instead, he surprised himself by telling the truth. Why do you do it? Do what? The volunteer work, he said. You could spend your days shopping at the spa, living the easy life of a wealthy sheikha. He studied her carefully. Why choose orphanages? Abandoned elders? Yasmin was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. Because they need help, and because I can help. She paused. And because, unlike some people, I can't pretend I don't see the suffering around me. The unspoken criticism struck him like an arrow. It also makes me feel useful, she continued. It reminds me that my life has meaning, even if my marriage doesn't. Hassan felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. Yasmin stood, folding the newspaper neatly. If you truly want to understand what I do, she said, pausing at the terrace door, you can come with me one day. She turned slightly, but not as the sheikh on an official visit. As Hassan, the man. She hesitated, then added calmly, Of course that would require stepping down from your pedestal for a few hours. I'm not sure you're ready for that. She left him alone on the terrace. That night, Hassan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her words echoing in his mind. Not as the sheikh, as the man. When was the last time anyone had made that distinction? When was the last time someone had cared about Hassan, the man, and not his title, his power, his wealth? Yasmin made that distinction effortlessly. She saw past the title, and that frightened him more than anything she had ever said or done, because it meant she had already passed through every defense he had built, without him even realizing it, and perhaps it was already too late to protect his heart. After that conversation, something changed in Yasmin, not suddenly or dramatically, but Hassan noticed it in the small details only a man obsessed could perceive. She stopped asking polite questions about his day, stopped wishing him good morning in the hallways, stopped offering those courteous smiles she used to maintain even when he treated her coldly. Instead, she treated him like air. Hassan came down for breakfast expecting to find her on the terrace as usual. She had already eaten and left for her volunteer work. He returned in the late afternoon, anticipating seeing her reading in the garden. The garden was empty. At dinner, she ate in complete silence. No comments about the food, no questions about the principality's affairs, no effort at conversation. It was as if Hassan had become invisible in his own home, and it was driving him mad. Hassan al-Rashid was accustomed to being the center of attention. In business meetings, people hung on his words. At social events, guests competed for his time. Women tried relentlessly to impress him. Yasmin did the opposite. She ignored him with a precision that bordered on art. The first week, Hassan told himself it was just a phase, a silent protest, a way to provoke him. By the second week, irritation set in. By the third, he realized it wasn't irritation. It was longing. He missed her polite questions, her careful smiles, her gentle attempts at conversation he had always rejected. Now that she had stopped trying, He understood how much those small gestures had mattered, and that realization terrified him. One morning, Hassan decided to break the silence. He came down early for breakfast, hoping to catch her before she left. Yasmin was finishing her meal when he arrived. The moment she saw him, she stood to leave. "Good morning, Yasmin," he said, trying to sound casual. She inclined her head slightly, a courtesy reserved for strangers, and continued walking. "How are the volunteer projects going?" he asked. "Fine," Yasmin replied without turning around. Then she was gone. Hassan remained alone on the terrace, struck by the unsettling sensation of having been dismissed. At the office later that day, he found himself replaying that single word. Fine. Yasmin used to explain her work with enthusiasm when he showed interest. Now, one syllable was all he received. That evening at dinner, he tried again. "I saw in the papers that you visited the rehabilitation center," he said. "Yes," Yasmin replied, cutting her food without looking at him. "And how was it?" "Fine." Hassan clenched his fists beneath the table. "Yasmin," he said, his voice slightly firmer, "I'm trying to have a civil conversation." She finally looked up. Her gaze was polite and completely devoid of warmth. "And I'm answering your questions politely," she replied evenly. "Is there anything else you'd like to know?" He had no words. She returned to her meal as if he didn't exist. The following weeks were a silent agony for Hassan. He paid attention to every movement Yasmin made in the house. He listened for her footsteps, memorized her schedule. He knew when she left, when she returned, when she slept. Yet he could no longer reach her. Yasmin had become an elegant ghost, sharing the same house, but nothing else. Hassan began inventing excuses to linger in common areas when he knew she might be there. The library, the garden. But Yasmin changed her routine, as if she could sense his presence and deliberately chose to be elsewhere. And for the first time, Hassan al-Rashid realized what it truly meant to lose someone who was still standing right in front of him. That night, Hassan could no longer endure the silence. Yasmin had finished dinner earlier than usual and was already halfway up the staircase when he arrived home. The echo of her steps against the marble walls stirred something restless inside him. Without thinking, he quickened his pace, almost running after her. "Yasmin, wait." She stopped in the middle of the staircase and turned slowly. Her expression was composed, polite, distant, like someone addressing an acquaintance rather than a husband. "Yes?" Hassan climbed a few steps, stopping 2 levels below her. Even so, she seemed unreachable, elevated by more than just physical distance. "We need to talk," he said. "About what?" she asked calmly. "About this." He gestured vaguely between them. "About what happened to us." "What happened to us?" Yasmin tilted her head slightly. "I don't recall anything happening between us, Hassan. For something to happen between 2 people, there must be a relationship first." Her words were sharp, precise, knives wrapped in velvet. The neutrality in her tone made them hurt even more. "Yasmin, don't be like this." "Like what?" She stepped down 1 stair, closer now. "I am being exactly what you always wanted me to be. Distant, without expectations. Treating our marriage as the formality you made very clear it was." Something cracked inside his chest. "I never wanted—" "Wanted what?" she interrupted. For the first time in weeks, emotion slipped into her voice. "You made it very clear from the first day what you wanted. A wife on paper, but never a real woman. Someone to fulfill a social requirement without emotionally inconveniencing you." "That's not true," Hassan said. But even to his own ears, the words sounded weak. "It is," Yasmin said, stepping closer still. "So tell me, Hassan, what changed? Why do you want to talk now? Why do you suddenly want my attention?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The truth was, he didn't know how to explain it. He only knew that her absence was killing him slowly, day after day. "That's what I thought," Yasmin continued softly, interpreting his silence. "You only want what you can't have. When I tried, you rejected me. Now that I've stopped trying, you want me back." Her analysis was painfully accurate. Hassan felt exposed, stripped bare. "Well, "I'm sorry to disappoint you," she said, "but I am not a toy you can pick up and discard whenever it suits you." She turned to continue upstairs, but in a desperate impulse, Hassan reached out and grabbed her arm. "Yasmin, please." She turned back slowly, her gaze first falling to his hand on her arm, then lifting to meet his eyes. He could see his own accelerated breathing reflected in her stare. "Please." "What?" she asked quietly. He realized then that he had no answer. He didn't know what he was asking for. Forgiveness. Attention. A return to the time when she still tried, when she still cared. "Do you really feel nothing anymore?" he asked, his voice more vulnerable than he intended. "Not a single thing that you didn't kill?" For a fleeting second, he thought he saw a shadow of pain cross her eyes, but it vanished so quickly, he wasn't sure it had ever been there. When she spoke again, her voice was calm, cold in a way that was far worse than shouting. "Everything I felt for you," Yasmin continued, "every hope, every kindness, every piece of love I brought into this marriage, you destroyed it all, carefully, with coldness, with rejection, with cruelty." Hassan stood frozen, watching his own actions reflected back at him like a mirror he could no longer avoid. "So no," she said, beginning to climb the stairs again. "I feel nothing, because you made sure there was nothing left for me to feel." He remained there, unmoving, as she disappeared onto the upper floor. When he heard the door to her bedroom close, something inside him collapsed completely. For the first time since returning to Darren, Hassan al-Hashid understood what real loss felt like. And with horror he realized it might already be too late to recover what he had destroyed. He stayed awake until dawn, an emptiness in his chest he couldn't even admit to himself, because admitting the emptiness would mean admitting that Yasmin had become important to him, and he wasn't ready to face that truth. The nights that followed became a silent hell. After the confrontation on the stairs, sleep abandoned him entirely. He lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, Yasmin's words echoing in his mind like an eternal sentence. "I feel nothing that you didn't kill." He turned from side to side, but peace never came. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, the coldness in her gaze, the way she recoiled when he touched her arm, the calm certainty with which she spoke of dead feelings. On the third sleepless night, Hassan gave up. He rose, wrapped himself in a robe, and went to his office. Perhaps work could distract him. But when he opened his laptop, the financial reports blurred before his eyes. Instead, he found himself staring out the window toward Yasmin's room. The light was off. She was sleeping peacefully while he unraveled in insomnia. With a frustrated motion, he shut the laptop and went to the library. He grabbed a random book and tried to read, but the words danced meaninglessly on the page. His mind drifted backward, replaying every moment since his return to Darren. For the first time, Hassan forced himself to be completely honest. Yasmin had been right about everything. If he truly wanted to avoid the marriage, he could have. He could have found a way, no matter how complicated. Hassan al-Hashid had never reached his position by accepting impossible obstacles, yet he hadn't fought it. He hadn't even tried. Why? He stood and began pacing the library, hands clasped behind his back, his mind working as if solving a complex business problem. Slowly, the truth seeped in like water through a crack in a wall. He had married Yasmin because, deep down, in a place he refused to acknowledge, he had hoped she could fill the emptiness he had carried for years. An emptiness no woman in London had managed to touch. An emptiness no professional success could erase. An emptiness he drowned with parties, alcohol, and meaningless affairs. He stopped pacing, his hands trembling slightly. In London, he had everything a man could desire: money, power, beautiful women competing for his attention, a luxury penthouse overlooking the Thames, expensive cars, access to the most exclusive circles. And yet, every morning he woke up alone in that apartment, feeling hollow. Coming to Darren for the marriage had been, in his mind, just another temporary sacrifice. He would fulfill his duty, keep appearances, and return to London as soon as possible. But then he saw Yasmin, and something in him recognized something in her. He sank heavily into a chair, rubbing his face. The truth was, Yasmin had frightened him from the very beginning. Not because she was submissive or unremarkable, but because she wasn't. She had become a woman of breathtaking beauty, yes, but more than that, she possessed an inner strength that unsettled him. A natural dignity, a genuine respect for everyone around her. Yasmin had something that none of the sophisticated women in London possessed. Authenticity, and that terrified him, because it meant she could see through all his masks. She could see the man behind the sheikh, behind the CEO, behind the international playboy. She could see Hassan as he truly was. And he feared she wouldn't like what she saw. So he had attacked first. Built walls before she could reject him. Hurt her before she could hurt him. He let out a bitter laugh in the empty library. What a brilliant strategy, to destroy the one person who might have loved him genuinely before even giving her a chance. Hours passed unnoticed. When the first ray of sunlight filtered through the library window, Hassan was still seated, lost in thought. Then he heard footsteps in the garden. He rose and looked outside. Yasmin was walking among the rose bushes, a watering can in her hands. She wore a simple white dress and flat sandals. Her hair was loose, moving softly with the morning breeze. For a long moment, Hassan simply watched her. There was peace in the way she moved among the flowers, as if she had found serenity even within pain. She had brought dignity into his house. Hassan understood it with crystal clarity that morning. Everywhere Yasmin touched, there was more life, more beauty, more humanity. The palace had become a home when she arrived, not because of decorations or physical changes, but because of her presence. The way she greeted the staff by name, the way she smiled sincerely, the way she genuinely cared. Hassan had gained more than a wife when he married Yasmin. He had gained someone who made his life better simply by existing in it. And he had thrown it all away out of pride and fear. Without consciously deciding to, Hassan left the library and walked toward the garden. Dark circles marked his eyes, his disheveled hair betraying the sleepless night he had endured. Yasmin was kneeling near a bed of white roses, calm and fresh, as if she had slept peacefully. The contrast between them was striking. He, exhausted and tormented. She, serene and at peace. She didn't hear him approach until he spoke. "Good morning." She glanced over her shoulder, clearly surprised to see him in the garden so early. "Good morning," she replied cautiously, returning to her task. Hassan stood there, hands in his pockets, searching for the right words. Words that might begin to repair the damage he had caused. "The roses are beautiful," he said at last. "They are," Yasmin replied without looking up. "The gardener takes good care of them." "No," Hassan said gently. "You do." She stopped moving the soil but didn't turn around. "I see you here every morning," he continued, watering, pruning, caring for them. "They've been more beautiful since you arrived." "Hassan," Yasmin began. "Please," he interrupted softly. "Let me finish." She remained still, her back to him. Hassan took a deep breath, preparing himself for what might be the most important conversation of his life. "I stayed awake all night thinking about what you said on the stairs," he said, his voice lower than he intended. "About me killing the feelings you had for me." Yasmin finally turned. Still kneeling among the roses, she met his eyes. Hassan saw a caution there he had never seen before. "And you were right," he continued. "About everything. I could have canceled the marriage if I truly wanted to. I could have found a way." He took a step closer. Yasmin remained still, watching him carefully. "I didn't cancel it because part of me wanted this. Wanted you." The words came out with difficulty, as if pulled from somewhere deep and guarded. "And that scared me more than anything I've ever felt." Yasmin blinked, clearly surprised by his honesty. "So I attacked you before you could attack me," he went on. "I built walls before you could reject me. I hurt you before you could hurt me." Hassan lowered himself to the ground, kneeling so they were at eye level. Dirt stained his trousers, but he didn't care. His hand moved instinctively toward hers, which still held a handful of soil. For a moment their fingers almost touched. Almost. He hesitated, then withdrew his hand. "Maybe," he said, looking directly into her eyes. "I was unfair." For a long moment the garden was completely silent. Yasmin studied him as if seeing a stranger. She didn't smile. She didn't throw herself into his arms. She didn't say she forgave him. But Hassan saw something in her eyes. Genuine surprise. As if he had said something she never expected to hear. And for now, that was enough. "Maybe," Yasmin repeated softly after a long pause. "Maybe you were." Something stirred in Hassan's chest. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. After the conversation in the garden, something shifted between them. Not dramatically, but like the subtle change of seasons. Almost imperceptible, yet real. Hassan began appearing for breakfast at the same time as Yasmin. He didn't speak much, but his presence was no longer hostile. It was careful, attentive. On the first morning, Yasmin greeted him with cautious politeness. Hassan responded in kind. They ate in silence, but it wasn't the icy silence of before. It was a silence that allowed for possibility. On the third morning, Hassan commented on the weather. "It's going to rain today," he said, glancing at the clouds through the window. "The roses will like that," Yasmin replied. It was a conversation that lasted less than a minute, but it was real. The following week, Hassan asked about the orphanage. "How is the boy who used to cry so much?" he asked. "Ahmad." Yasmin looked at him in surprise. She had only mentioned Ahmad once, weeks ago. "He's better," she said carefully. "He's made a few friends." Hassan nodded. "Children need friends." Yasmin agreed, and for a brief moment their eyes met across the table. It wasn't a look of hostility or distrust. It was just a look. Small gestures continued to grow, like delicate plants. Hassan stopped leaving rooms when Yasmin entered. Instead, he stayed, pretending to read or work, while quietly observing her movements. Yasmin stopped changing direction when she saw him in the corridors. Instead, she walked normally, offering a small nod as she passed. One evening at dinner, Hassan asked about her work at the rehabilitation center. "It must be difficult," he said, listening to the women's stories. Yasmin froze for a moment, her fork suspended in midair. It was the first time Hassan showed genuine interest in her work. "It is," she admitted. "But it's also inspiring, seeing how they find the strength to begin again." Hassan absorbed her words slowly. "Starting over takes courage," he said. The words hung between them, heavy with double meaning. Yasmin studied him, trying to determine whether he was speaking only about the women at the center, or about something far more personal. "Yes," she said at last. "It does." They finished the meal in a silence that, for the first time in months, wasn't uncomfortable. 2 weeks after the conversation in the garden, the invitation arrived, the one that would change everything. The French embassy was hosting a formal dinner honoring political and business leaders of the region. As a sheikh and prominent businessman, Hassan was expected to attend, and as his wife, Yasmin was expected as well. "You'll need to come," Hassan said during breakfast, handing her the elegant invitation. Yasmin read it quickly. It was the kind of event she had learned to tolerate. Too much politics, too much display, too much social falseness. "Of course," she replied. "What kind of event is it?" "Formal? Conservative?" Hassan hesitated. "Yasmin, some guests may make comments about our marriage, about us. Journalists will be there too." She understood what he wasn't saying. It would be their first public appearance since the shift in their relationship. People would observe, analyze, search for signs of marital trouble. "I understand," she said. "We'll keep up appearances." Hassan looked at her for a long moment. "It's not just about appearances," he said. She lifted her eyes, surprised by his tone. "I mean—" He ran a hand through his hair. A gesture she had learned signaled discomfort. "It doesn't have to be just appearances." Something stirred in Yasmin's chest, but she forced her voice to remain neutral. "What are you suggesting?" "That maybe we could try being a real couple," he said quietly. "At least for one night." The proposal hung between them like a fragile bridge over an abyss. "For one night?" Yasmin repeated. "To see what it feels like," Hassan said. "No pressure, no expectations, just see." She studied him. There was something different in his eyes, a vulnerability she rarely saw, a careful hope he tried to conceal. "All right," she said finally. "We can try, on the night of the event." That evening, Yasmin chose a long burgundy dress that highlighted her golden skin. Simple, elegant. When she descended the stairs, she found Hassan waiting in the hall. He wore a black tuxedo and looked more handsome than he had any right to be. When he saw her, his eyes widened slightly. "You look beautiful," he said, not as a courtesy, but genuinely. "Thank you," Yasmin replied, feeling her cheeks warm. During the drive to the hotel, they talked about trivial things, the traffic, the weather, the guest list. But there was a different energy between them, as if they were rehearsing roles they weren't sure how to play. The ballroom was filled with elegant people, golden lights, and the murmur of conversations in several languages. As they entered, Hassan placed his hand on Yasmin's back, a protective gesture she hadn't expected. For the first hour they behaved as they always did at public events, polite, cordial, distant. Hassan greeted the guests. Yasmin smiled gracefully at his side. But then, something changed. An Italian businessman made a casual remark about arranged marriages being things of the past. "I imagine it must be difficult," the man said with a polite smile, "to be tied to such outdated traditions when one lives such a modern life." Hassan stiffened beside Yasmin. She prepared herself for the diplomatic, empty response he usually gave in situations like that. Instead, Hassan surprised everyone. "Actually," he said, his voice clear and firm, "my marriage to Yasmin is one of the best decisions I have ever made." The Italian blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. "Yasmin is not just my wife on paper," Hassan continued, turning his gaze directly to her. "She is my companion, my partner, a woman I deeply admire." For a moment, Yasmin's heart stopped. Then it started racing. Hassan was looking at her with an intensity that made her knees weaken. His eyes held hers without hesitation. "Traditions sometimes give us gifts we never expected," Hassan said, still looking at her. "And I have been very fortunate." Murmurs of approval rippled through the group. Someone commented about true love. Yasmin barely heard any of it. All she could see were Hassan's eyes. All she could feel was his hand, which had moved to take hers. When she finally remembered how to breathe, Yasmin realized something inside her had shifted. A wall she had built with so much care had begun to crack. Hassan had spoken about her with genuine pride. In front of strangers, in front of journalists, he had publicly declared that she mattered to him. And from his tone, from the way he looked at her, she believed him. For the rest of the evening, Hassan stayed by her side differently, not as an obligation, but as someone who truly wanted to be there. He included her in conversations, tilted his head to listen to her opinions, smiled when she made sharp, intelligent remarks, touched her arm gently when he wanted her attention, and Yasmin felt warmth spread through her skin. For the first time since the wedding, she felt like they were truly a couple. On the drive back to the palace, they remained silent, but it was a different silence, one heavy with unspoken possibilities. "Thank you," Yasmin said when they arrived. "For what?" Hassan asked. "For what you said," she replied softly. "About me." Hassan paused at the entrance and turned to face her. "I told the truth," he said simply. Yasmin looked at him for a long moment, her heart still racing. Part of her wanted to believe completely, to lower every defense and leap into that possibility. But another part of her, the part that had been hurt too deeply, warned her to be careful. "Good night, Hassan," she said quietly and walked up the stairs. Hassan remained in the hall, watching her disappear. That night, Yasmin lay in bed with her heart still pounding. Hassan's words echoed in her mind, the way he had looked at her, the pride in his voice. The wall around her heart was crumbling, but she wasn't ready to let it fall completely. 3 days after the embassy event, the tension in the palace was palpable. Hassan paced the corridors like a caged lion. Yasmin maintained her polite courtesy, but there was something different in her eyes, as if she were waiting for something, testing whether his words at the dinner had been real. The explosion came on a Tuesday night. During dinner, Yasmin mentioned a new initiative at the orphanage, a fundraising campaign to renovate the building. "We need sponsors," she said. "I thought maybe you could—" "No," Hassan cut in abruptly. Yasmin stopped, surprised. "No," he repeated. "I won't use my company for your charity projects." The words came out harsher than Hassan intended, but he was irritated. Irritated by the way she had been looking at him these past days, as if expecting something from him, as if believing he could truly change. "Charity projects?" Yasmin repeated, her voice dangerously low. "They are orphan children, Hassan. Children who sleep in rooms with leaking roofs, who eat from cracked plates." She stood up. "But of course," she continued bitterly, "that's not important enough for the great Sheikh Hassan al-Rashid, is it?" "That's not it," Hassan said, standing as well. "I just can't mix business with—" "With what?" Yasmin exploded. "With compassion, with humanity, with feelings." "I can't mix business with feelings," Hassan snapped. Silence fell between them like a bomb. "Feelings," Yasmin repeated slowly. "That's what I am to you, isn't it? An inconvenient feeling you need to control." Hassan ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Yasmin said, stepping toward him, her eyes blazing. "At the embassy you said all those beautiful things. You made me think that maybe, just maybe, you really wanted me." Her voice broke. "That maybe it wasn't all just another performance to impress others." Hassan froze. The accusation hit him like a punch. "That's what it was, wasn't it?" Yasmin continued, tears beginning to shine in her eyes. "Just a show, a way to keep up appearances." "Yasmin, no, I was so stupid," she laughed bitterly. "For a moment, I believed you could see me." "Value me." "Stop!" Hassan shouted, his voice echoing through the dining room. They stood there, breathing hard, staring at each other across an abyss of pain and frustration. The silence that followed was suffocating, loaded with everything they couldn't say, everything they felt but didn't dare admit. Hassan looked at Yasmin as if seeing her for the first time. Her hair was slightly disheveled by emotion. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and with a fury that made her even more beautiful in that moment. Something inside Hassan snapped. All the restraint, all the control, all the defenses he had built so carefully, collapsed. He crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides. His hands grabbed Yasmin's face, fingers tangling in her hair, and he kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It wasn't an apology or a reconciliation. It was a kiss of possession, of suppressed desire exploding all at once. Hassan's mouth crashed against hers with an intensity that made her stumble. His hands held her firmly as she lost balance, pulling her hard against his chest. Yasmin tried to resist for a second. Her hands lifted to push him away. But when his tongue invaded her mouth without permission, when he took complete control of the kiss, something inside her melted. Hassan kissed like a starving man who had denied himself water for too long, only to finally find the source. Yasmin had never been kissed before. She had never felt the force of a man who knew exactly what he wanted and how to take it. Her inexperience was obvious. She didn't know where to put her hands, didn't know how to match the merciless rhythm he set, didn't know how to breathe when he kissed her as if he wanted to devour her whole. Hassan didn't care. All he cared about was showing her, through that brutal kiss, everything he had kept locked inside. His hands slid from her face to her waist, pulling her even closer. Yasmin felt the heat of his body through their clothes, felt the strength of his tense muscles, felt his heart pounding wildly against her chest. When Hassan tilted his head to deepen the kiss even more, Yasmin let out a soft moan against his lips. The sound shattered the last trace of control he had left. He pressed her back against the dining room wall, his body completely covering hers. One hand braced against the wall beside her head, the other remained firm at her waist. Yasmin finally found where to place her hands. They slid up his chest, felt the hard muscles beneath his shirt, and clutched his shoulders as if he were her only anchor in a storm. The kiss tasted of frustration and desire, of unsaid words and broken promises, of 2 years of emotional war finally reaching a violent truce. When Hassan bit her lower lip lightly, Yasmin arched instinctively against him. The movement made him groan, a deep, rough sound that vibrated through her chest. It was pain and passion intertwined, revenge and surrender at once. It was everything they had denied themselves since the first day. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Hassan didn't step away. The Italian businessman laughed lightly as he made a dismissive comment about arranged marriages, calling them relics of the past. "I imagine it must be difficult," he said casually, swirling the wine in his glass, "to remain bound to such ancient traditions when one lives such a modern life." Razan stiffened almost imperceptibly beside Yasmin. She felt the tension in his body instantly and prepared herself for the usual diplomatic, empty response he often gave in public. Polite, distant, carefully neutral. Instead, Razan surprised everyone. "Actually," he said, his voice clear and steady, "my marriage to Yasmin is one of the best decisions I have ever made." The Italian blinked, clearly unprepared for that answer. Yasmin's breath caught in her chest. "She's not just my wife on paper," Razan continued, turning fully toward her now, his gaze unwavering. "She is my companion, my partner, a woman I deeply admire." For a moment, Yasmin felt as if her heart had stopped. Then it began racing wildly. The way Razan was looking at her made her legs tremble. "Traditions," he added calmly, still holding her eyes, "sometimes give us gifts we never expected, and I have been very fortunate." Murmurs of approval rippled through the small crowd around them. Someone mentioned true love. Yasmin barely heard it. All she could see were Razan's eyes. All she could feel was his hand slipping into hers, warm and steady. When she finally managed to breathe again, Yasmin realized something inside her had shifted. A wall she had built carefully, brick by brick, had begun to crack. Razan had spoken about her with genuine pride, before strangers, before journalists. He had declared publicly that she mattered, and by his tone, by the way he had looked at her, she believed him. For the rest of the evening, Razan stayed close in a way that felt different. Not out of obligation, but as if he truly wanted to be there. He included her in conversations, tilted his head to listen to her opinions, smiled when she made sharp observations, touched her arm gently when he wanted her attention. Every small gesture sent warmth spreading across her skin. For the first time since their marriage, Yasmin felt as though they were truly a couple. On the drive back to the palace, silence filled the car, but it was not the familiar, heavy silence of distance. It was charged, full of unspoken possibilities. "Thank you," Yasmin said softly when they arrived. "For what?" Razan asked. "For what you said. About me." Razan paused at the entrance and turned to face her. "I told the truth," he said simply. She looked at him for a long moment, her heart still racing. Part of her wanted to believe completely, to lower every defense and fall into that fragile hope. But another part, older, wounded, urged caution. "Good night, Razan," she said quietly and went upstairs. Razan remained in the hall, watching her disappear. That night, Yasmin lay awake, his words echoing in her mind. The way he had looked at her, the pride in his voice. The walls around her heart were crumbling, but she was not yet ready to let them fall completely. 3 days after the embassy event, tension thickened the palace halls. Razan moved through them like a caged lion. Yasmin maintained her polite composure, but something in her eyes had changed, as if she were waiting, testing whether his words at the dinner had been real. The explosion came on Tuesday night. During dinner, Yasmin spoke about a new initiative at the orphanage, a fundraising campaign to repair the building. "We need sponsors," she said carefully. "I thought perhaps you could—" "No," Razan cut in abruptly. She froze. "No," he repeated. "I won't use my company for your charity projects." The words came out harsher than he intended, but irritation had been building for days. Not irritation at the project, at the way she had been looking at him lately. Expecting something, believing he could change. "Charity projects?" Yasmin repeated, her voice dangerously low. "They're orphaned children, Razan. Children sleeping under leaking roofs, eating from cracked plates." She stood up. "But of course," she added bitterly, "that isn't important enough for the great Sheikh Razan al-Hashid." "That's not what I meant," he said, rising as well. "I can't mix business with compassion," she snapped. "With humanity? With feelings?" "I can't mix business with feelings," Razan said sharply. Silence fell like a bomb. "Feelings," Yasmin repeated slowly. "Is that all I am to you? An inconvenient feeling you need to control?" "You don't understand," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I understand perfectly." She stepped closer, fury blazing in her eyes. "At the embassy, you said all those beautiful things. You made me think, maybe, that you truly wanted me." The accusation hit him like a punch. That it wasn't just another performance to impress others. Tears shimmered in her eyes. "Was it?" she demanded. "Just a show? A way to keep appearances?" She laughed bitterly. "I was so stupid. For a moment I believed you could see me, value me." "Stop!" Razan shouted. They stood there, breathing hard, staring at each other across an abyss of pain and frustration. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with everything they felt but had never dared to admit. Razan looked at Yasmin as if seeing her for the first time. Her hair was slightly disheveled from emotion. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. Her eyes burned with unshed tears and a fury that only made her more beautiful. Something inside him broke. All the restraint, all the control. Every carefully built defense collapsed. In 2 long strides, Razan closed the distance. His hands framed her face firmly, fingers threading into her hair, and he kissed her. It was not gentle, it was not apologetic. It was a kiss of possession, of vindication, of desire exploding after years of denial. His mouth crashed against hers with an intensity that made her stagger. He caught her instantly, pulling her against his chest. Yasmin tried to resist for a heartbeat, her hands lifting to push him away. But when his tongue claimed her mouth without permission, when he took full control, something inside her melted. Razan kissed like a man who had denied himself water for too long and had finally found the source. Yasmin had never been kissed before, never felt the force of a man who knew exactly what he wanted. Her inexperience was obvious. She didn't know where to place her hands, how to follow the ruthless rhythm he set, how to breathe when he kissed her as if he intended to consume her. Razan didn't care. His hands slid from her face to her waist, pulling her closer. She felt his heat through their clothes, the strength of his body, his heart pounding wildly against hers. When he pressed her back against the dining room wall, his body completely covering hers, she finally found where to put her hands, gripping his shoulders as if he were her only anchor in a storm. When he bit her lower lip gently, she arched into him instinctively, drawing a low groan from his throat. It was pain and passion intertwined, vengeance and surrender, everything they had denied themselves since the first day. Nara, when they finally parted, breathless, Razan rested his forehead against hers. His breathing mingled with hers, heavy and unsteady. Yasmin's lips were swollen, her eyes closed, her body trembling. He whispered her name. She opened her eyes slowly. In them he saw shock, confusion, desire, and something else that made his chest tighten. The memory of his words from their wedding night haunted him. "You will only ever be my wife on paper." Because in that moment, Yasmin was his wife in every way that mattered. He stepped back, hands trembling. She remained against the wall, watching him with an expression he couldn't decipher. He began, then stopped. How could he explain 2 years of denial exploding in a single moment? Yasmin straightened her dress with shaking hands, touched her lips as if still unsure what had happened. "Good night, Razan," she said softly, and left the room. Razan stayed there, knowing everything had changed, and for the first time, He did not regret it. The 3 nights later, unable to bear the distance any longer, Razan walked to her door after midnight. When she opened it, wearing a white silk robe, her eyes revealed she hadn't slept either. "May I come in?" he asked. After a long pause, she stepped aside. Moonlight bathed the room. Silence filled it, intimate, heavy with possibility. "I don't regret it," he said quietly. Neither did she. And that night, slowly, patiently, with tenderness and restraint, Razan finally showed Yasmin what it meant to be loved, not as duty, not as appearance, but as choice. And nothing between them would ever be the same again. Realizing that his own tears were mixing with hers, Razan understood that what they were experiencing was more than passion. It was healing. It was redemption. It was the birth of the love that should have existed from the very first day. Afterward, they remained intertwined in the sacred silence of the night, hearts still racing, skin warm, breaths slowly finding rhythm. Razan kissed Yasmin's damp eyelids, whispering words of love so softly they felt like prayers meant only for her. "Yasmin," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, "I love you more than I ever thought possible." She lifted her head to look at him, her eyes still shining with tears and wonder. "I love you too," she whispered. "I always have." Razan pulled her closer, sealing an eternal promise with a gentle kiss. For the first time since their wedding, they slept in the same bed. Not as strangers bound by duty, but as husband and wife in truth. The next morning, Yasmin awoke to the scent of coffee and something sweet. She opened her eyes slowly and found Razan beside the bed, holding a breakfast tray. He was smiling, a smile she had never seen before, completely open, deeply in love. "Good morning, my wife," he said softly, placing the tray on the bed. Yasmin sat up, pulling the sheet around herself, her hair tousled, her cheeks flushed with shy embarrassment. "You brought me breakfast in bed?" she asked, still incredulous at this tender version of her husband. "I did," Razan replied, sitting beside her, his eyes filled with affection. "I thought you deserved to be spoiled." She hid her face in her hands, overwhelmed by the memory of the night before. Razan laughed quietly and gently pulled her hands away. "Don't hide from me," he said. "Not after last night." "It was intense," she admitted softly. "It was perfect," Razan corrected, kissing her forehead. "You were perfect." They ate together, sharing shy smiles and lingering glances. Razan fed her pieces of fruit, watching every expression on her face as if committing them to memory. "Razan," Yasmin said when they finished, her voice thoughtful, "what happens now?" He took her hand and kissed each finger with reverence. "Now we begin again," he said. "Now we build the marriage that should have existed from the start." "You promise?" she asked, her voice trembling with hope. Razan cupped her face, his gaze steady and solemn. "I promise our future will be built on respect and love. I promise every decision will be made together. I promise you will never feel alone in this marriage again." Tears of happiness filled Yasmin's eyes. "And I promise," she said, "that I will never give up on us. Never again." He kissed her deeply, sealing their vows. Outside, dawn rose over Darren, a silent witness to a new beginning. The marriage that had begun as a prison had become liberation. What was once forced by duty had transformed into a home built by love. For the first time since their vows, they were truly husband and wife, not only on paper, but in heart and soul. Months passed. In the palace garden, Yasmin walked slowly as the warm breeze lifted the soft veils of her dress. One hand rested instinctively over her belly, still subtle, but already carrying life. From a distance, Razan watched her as if unable to believe what he was seeing. The woman he had once dismissed before the world, the wife he had sworn never to love, was now the center of his entire existence. He approached and intertwined his fingers with hers. "Are you ready for the trip?" he asked, smiling softly. Yasmin looked up at him, emotional. "I never thought I would walk through Europe, and with you by my side." "You won't just walk," Razan said, kissing her forehead. "I want you to see London, Paris, Rome. I want you to know every place I once lived alone. Now everything will be ours." Her eyes sparkled. "Ours," and the babies. Razan placed his hand over her belly with reverence. The pride and hardness he had carried all his life dissolved. In that moment, he was simply a man in love, about to become a father. As the sun rose over Darren, bathing the kingdom in golden light, the place once marked by pain and distance became a witness to renewal. Hand in hand, Yasmin and Razan crossed the garden toward the limousine that would take them to the airport. The journey ahead was not merely a trip through Europe. It was the promise of a future built together, of love, respect, and new memories. Darren would always hold the marks of the past, but carried on the wings of the present. Razan and Yasmin departed toward something greater, an eternity of love that no desert, no pride, and no distance could ever erase. But if this story moved you, comment where you're watching from. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Stories JP. She was the despised virgin wife. He was the sheikh who swore never to love her. But in the desert, rejection became desire, and the impossible turned into eternal love.